Well, thank you guys for attending. I want to thank, of course, MyTESOL for hosting us at this conference. It's been a great conference so far. And I thought we'd get started just with a little story. So in the 1960s, my father immigrated to this country from Italy. And he started, this was before the days of ESL, that was the days of English for foreigners. So my father took a class and struggled his way through English and struggled his way through a pronunciation and a spelling system and something that's completely different than Italian. And the work that you folks do is near and dear to my heart because my father, through those classes, was able to excel and had a great career and helped put 2 sons through college, so it's a wonderful thing. And the funniest part of that story is that many years later, I was in high school, and my father attended a parent-teacher conference, and he walks in the door, and who does he see? And of course, I didn't know this. He sees his teacher from way back when. And the first thing my father said to him is, "Laugh cannot possibly be spelled with a G or an H. It's not possible." So it was a great story, and it was something that I didn't know. This was my history teacher who actually was my father's English teacher when he first came to this country. So thank you for the work that you do. If we do everything correctly today, we're going to get through a little bit about translation. We're trying to arm you with the knowledge to become a better purchaser of this service, whether it's translation or interpretation or narration. Quickly, just a little bit about myself. My name is Peter Argondizzo. I'm one of the founders of Argo Translation. We've been in business for 23 years. We're based out of Chicago, and we provide services to corporations and school districts to basically make connection. People ask what we do is we help make connection. So we're connecting people who have that gap or that barrier of language. We try to knock that down. We, of course, want to help school districts to do the same thing. So in terms of the types of projects you might encounter, there's, of course, translation. So that's the written form. You'll often hear, and it drives me crazy, right? You're watching TV and the news, and they say, well, you know, this translator was helping. Well, no, it was likely an interpreter. So we do translation, which is the written work, and of course we do interpretation. We also offer telephonic interpretation, which is one of the most common services used by the school districts we work with. And that essentially is where there's a number that's dialed with an access code, and within seconds you're connected to an interpreter, and that would allow you to then have a conversation with a parent or a student or someone you're trying to engage with. So that's a very popular service, as well as narration. So we do video work, whether it's with e-learning or state of the school district, or where an administrator is trying to communicate on a website, they might do video. So we do narration for that service as well. So okay, if everything goes well today, you'll walk out with some knowledge on these 5 topics. This is what I thought we would cover. We talk a little bit about proper register, something that's not often thought about when we're writing documentation for those that have a limited English ability. Regional considerations. You know, that's where we're going to talk a little bit more about how do we make sure that we're not using terminology or slang that isn't appropriate for those that aren't from this country. They won't understand the material. We'll talk a little bit about the review process. Any good translation project is also followed by a good review process. So we'll talk a little bit about the tips that you can follow to ensure that you have a good review process. And a little bit about reporting and documentation. What should you expect from those that you're purchasing these services from in terms of understanding how you're spending the hard-earned budget dollars and you know, how you're spending per language. As well as translation memory, which in my mind is one of the most important topics. If you can understand translation memory, you can understand how to increase that budget for your district. Great, so why don't we start with proper register? I guess I should start this way. I just always like to learn the languages spoken in the room. What are some of the languages that you speak besides English in the room? Portuguese, okay. Spanish? Spanish, okay, great. Are you all from Michigan districts, I would assume? Okay, great, thank you. So some of these things you're going to understand, obviously, but we have to help our colleagues that are writing some of the content that we're then going to translate to understand. So in terms of register, you know, we always want to use short, simple sentences. We want to make sure to keep things very clear for our users. Graphic elements are actually really good, right? How many of you have purchased furniture from IKEA? There's not one word on their instructions, right? It's all graphic. So we were just talking a little bit about proper register and understanding that when we write documentation, we have to keep the idea of register, we have to keep things simple. Because oftentimes as well, we're dealing with heritage speakers. So even if when we're doing the translation, we have to be careful. I know when my father came to this country, he had a 3rd grade education. So he came from a farming community in Italy, and you went to school until you were in 3rd grade, and then you started working on the farm. So even complex Italian sentences wouldn't make a lot of sense. Of course, he then furthered his education, but that's something to keep in mind, is that when we're speaking with heritage speakers, right, their skills in English, of course, aren't there, but their skills in Spanish or their skills in Arabic or their skills in Brazilian Portuguese may not be at the highest level. So we have to keep things simple. We also want to avoid overly complex jargon. We have to be careful if we're referring to some government standard. We have to be careful that we're maybe explaining around these things. Like one of my favorite stories is we do a lot of menus for like school lunch programs, and a bagel. It's something as simple as a bagel. Well, there's not really a translation in most languages for a bagel, so sometimes you have to explain around the item so the parents can understand exactly what it is, that it's basically a bread product. We also want to use language that's culture and gender neutral. That's very important. Also, keeping things in the active voice help. That really helps create a better translation. And using the imperative is also, especially when you're giving directions, that's typically what we prefer. A little bit about regional considerations. So, we have to understand those that are Spanish speakers, and even, oh gosh, for all the languages that are in a room, there's not one version of Arabic, there's not one version of Spanish, there's not one version of Portuguese. There are differences in the sub-languages, so we have to keep that in mind. And that's tough. We deal with some districts that have 4 or 5 versions of Spanish. Well, if we can barely afford to do the translation in one sub-language, we have to be careful. We have to try to pick something that's neutral, that's going to be understood by the broadest cross-section of speakers in the community. There are a few that have the huge budgets. We did a project once for a very large tobacco manufacturer, and it was geared at the folks growing tobacco. So we did 16 versions of Spanish for them because they had that many, but they could afford to do that type of project. That's not going to happen in the school districts. Some of the things to think about are also customs and norms. So we love acronyms: PTA, ACT, SAT, IEP. These things all mean something to educators here in this country, but think of the folks that are coming over. They may not understand what these acronyms are. There's not necessarily translation for them. So we oftentimes will have to explain those acronyms so they understand and can become accustomed to how we use them. That's also true of local authorities. Simply saying dial 911. Well, it might be 311. It might be something completely different. So we have to understand that those are emergency services, or other acronyms that we use here like TSA and FAA and HIPAA. And these are all things that they may not understand. So we have to explain around them. Also, social programs like Social Security or health insurance. Most other countries have nationalized health, so the idea of purchasing health insurance is something out of the ordinary. So we have to keep those things in mind. Slang, humor, and catchphrases are also really, really tough. We have to be careful. We often want to inject, even if it's something as simple as a flyer for a Halloween party, we have to be careful with slang because it's very difficult to translate. It has to be localized. So that's an important task. We also have to understand that holidays might not be, this is obvious, of course, the holidays might not be understood. Halloween is something that's incredibly American, right? So we have to be careful on how we address parents, how we give them the information so they understand what we're trying to do. The review process. This is a really important part of any successful translation. We need feedback. It's not that we're talking about mistakes. What we really need is someone to weigh in, because we may not understand exactly, what sub-languages are you trying to serve? This is feedback that we need. And if there's, we don't, this term is not necessarily used in our district. We prefer this term. because we have more Colombian immigrants, we have more Mexican immigrants. You know what? Most of our families come from Portugal. They don't come from Brazil. So we have to modify how we use terminology. So we suggest that our documentation that we translate is reviewed. That's really where we, or any translation service provider, would come into play, is that they want your feedback. All too often, what's going on, and I get it, it's a budget constraint, is that we're having teachers doing translation. Well, they also have to do their day job, and it's not always easy to then do that translation. And you don't have the tools that our translators have. And we're going to talk about translation memory a little bit later. But we want your feedback. The translation service companies that you work with should request your feedback. That way you can do a quick review. That's much easier than doing a complete translation. And your review and your feedback should feed into that translation memory, which will make sense once we cover that topic at the end. Really what we suggest, though, is try to stay away from stylistic changes. Stylistic changes don't necessarily add value. What we're looking for in that review process, or what that translation service provider should be looking for, is terminology. What's the norm in your district? You know, what are you hearing from the parents? Is it maybe something that we didn't get right in terms of the register? Hey, this needs to be a little bit simpler. That's the type of feedback that the service provider should be looking for. You also want to make sure to use track changes so the translator can easily identify and understand what feedback you're giving them, what changes. So Microsoft Word has a great track changes feature in it, as well as Acrobat. You can turn the commenting feature on. In fact, there's some videos on our site on how to use the Acrobat one. It's quite easy. And you also want to try to make global changes. We realize your time is incredibly valuable. So if there's a term, you know, you're doing, say, a student handbook, and there's a term that you don't like or you want to be changed, instead of like marking it through the whole thing, just write global, say change this term globally. The translator's smart enough to make sure that then when they're making the change, they're not going to just do find and replace. They're going to make sure that we're matching gender or we're matching number, or, you know, we're doing the changes in the appropriate way. And again, feeding those back into the translation memory. A little bit about proper reporting and documentation. One of the things that we founded our firm on is transparency. You should really require it and demand it of your providers. You should get a good understanding of how much am I spending per language. They should provide you this data. Who's doing my translation? You know, that's also very important. All too often in our world, there are too many people that think Google Translate is just as good as human translation, and it's just not there yet. Maybe someday it will be. I'm not one of those naysayers who say, it'll never happen. Maybe. It certainly isn't today, though. So it can't be. So you have to ask these questions, and you have to demand that they're providing that information to you on a job-by-job basis. Is it human translation? Who's doing my translation? Is it being reviewed? These are the things that when you're spending your money on translation, you should require. Also, just to kind of understand how the pricing works on these services, so telephonic interpretation is typically billed by the minute. But make sure you're asking the right questions in terms of, are there monthly fees? Is there an activation fee? Is there a per call minimum? Make sure to ask those questions. Then when you go to the translation side, all too often, people are fixated on the per word price. They say, what is the per word price? I'm going to encourage you not to be so fixated on the per word price. And of course, when we talk about translation memory, this will become apparent. What you want to look at is the total cost of running the program. And the reason is, in translation memory, we can discount content for repetitions and 100% matches. You know, unfortunately, I guess I have to jump right into that a little bit, is that with translation memory, essentially all that is a database where human translation is stored. And the reason it's important is because when you do similar content, when you do that bus policy again, or the computer policy, or the iPad policy, you do that year over year and you're making minor changes, if anything. When that translation is completed by a human, it should go into that database. So then when the new project or the new version comes up, it gets analyzed against the old work and only the new material should be translated. But what's important about that is you should only pay for the new material as well. So that should, over time, drag your per word cost down. It should drag that cost down. So you want to understand the price per word, but you want to talk about what are my discounts going to be for 100% and fuzzy matches, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. And you'll also want to be able to interact with the administration in the right way. You'll want to be able to get annual reports or quarterly reports on what you're spending. So you'll want that level of transparency so you can go to the administration and say, this is how we're doing. Because of the vendor I've chosen, they've provided us these discounts for repetitive work. I would challenge all of you to be advocates. And the translation service provider should be your partner in this effort. They should be able to help you stretch your dollars as far as they can go. Vendor reports. We talked a little bit about human translation versus machine translation. It's always good to know as well, am I going to get the same Spanish translator? Because I really like this work. Am I going to get the same Arabic translator and proofreader? They've done a nice job. I want to make sure that they're doing all my jobs. Ask those types of questions, because with a lot of the larger firms, they use something called crowdsourcing, which you should be aware of. And essentially, that's where they toss a job up into the internet, basically their world of translators, and whoever raises their hand first does the job. Not my favorite approach. You should ask your vendor to partner with you. In other words, this translator is great. They get me. This is the terminology I like. This is what we want to see. And ask. And if it's possible, have them provide you a report with their vendor code or something to show that this is the same translator and proofreader on every job. That budgetary information that comes out of this process, going back to cost, is very valuable. That is how you're going to be able to advocate for your program. How am I going to continue to take that funding that I get and stretch it further every year? It's very important. All right, translation memory. I save this one for last because it's a little bit, kind of goes into the, as we say in the States, right, the sausage making of the process. It kind of goes behind the scenes. But as I mentioned, it is a database. It is not machine translation. It's called computer-assisted translation. All it does is it reminds the translator. The environment that the translator works in is essentially, it looks like a spreadsheet with English on one side, or the source language on one side, and the target in another. At our firm, we use a tool called WordBee. There's one that's out there called Trados. There's quite a few different tools. But they work essentially the same way. And all it does is it, again, catalogs all the translation that's already been created for your account, for your district. And it reminds them, when they run across a sentence that they've done before, it says, hey, you used this last time. Hey, this sentence is very similar to one you've used in the past. That's a fuzzy match. Use this one. The reason why translation memory is important, again, it helps you further your budget. So you're not paying for or retranslating the same material that you've done over and over again. Over time, you should see your translation costs go down because of translation memory. It's also important for consistency, right? You want the same voice. We talked about having that same translator. The translation memory allows you to be consistent from project to project. We're all human. If we're only looking at that computer policy once a year for your district, we need to be reminded of what we used in the past. Otherwise, we will reinvent the wheel every time. So that translation memory allows us to stay consistent. It also saves time. We realize, the translation service providers should realize, that there are times when you have to get something out very quickly. It's a communication to a parent. Something's happened in your district that needs to be communicated. So having translation memory helps save time. All right, so we get the concept. Basically, 100% match, think of it this way. Is you have document A and document B. We already translated the sentence, so a red apple's a red apple. Instead, a repetition is when you might have the same sentence, but we haven't translated it yet, but it occurs in multiple documents or even in the same document. So that's a repetition. That just means that that same unit repeats itself. So you save money on that as well. The tools that we use allow us to analyze the document against your memory and get this data back to you. Say, the translation would have cost this, but when we put these discounts in, it costs this. And that should be shown. You should have that level of transparency. A fuzzy match, instead, is where you have a sentence that's very similar. They're both apples, but one's red and one's green. That's a fuzzy match. So in text now and not fruit, right? Here's an example. Obviously, a fuzzy match would be where you said, please select the print option to print out all the selected reports. For some reason, someone comes across and wants to wordsmith it. They don't like the word select anymore, and they use choose. That's a fuzzy match. Quite frankly, in translation, oftentimes it'll be the same translation because it might be the same word. But we do discount that as well. Demand that from your translation service providers. 100% match would be it's exactly the same sentence occurring over and over again. We talked a little bit about kind of the data that you should expect. A quote should be very transparent. You should understand how many words are there, how many repetitions, how many 100% matches, how many fuzzy matches. In this example, you'll see that. You'll see how many words are coming out of the database. And why that's important, again, is if you look at this example, there's a gross cost, but then there's all those discounts for those memory matches. And that drives that net cost per word down. That's what's important. How do I maximize my budget? So one bonus item. I talked about 5 things, but I wanted to include a 6th before we take some questions. A little bit help on how to select a vendor. It can be maddening. There are thousands of companies like my firm. How do you select? Make sure to ask those important questions. We talked a lot about them. So to recap, ask, is it human translation? Is it machine translation? What are the steps you follow? Is there a translator? Is there a proofreader? Get engaged in the process. By the way, if I want to save money on a budget, can I choose a translation-only option? Will you allow that? What is your minimum charge? It's very important to understand because your first project might be that parent handbook and you say, okay, that's great. We chose the vendor with the lowest price and the best process. We're content. But then you might have that one page, hey, school is closed. It snowed 12 feet last night. And you might need that urgently and it's only a couple paragraphs. Find out up front what that minimum charge is going to be. Are they going to work with your district on small projects? What does this service include? If their quote says, Italian translation of handout, ask a question. Again, it's a machine. Do I get a translator? Do I get a proofreader? Do you use translation memory? Now you're armed with the knowledge to get the best value, the best price for your money. Is this honeymoon pricing? All too often, companies that are really interested in earning your business will give you a really low price on the first job. And then the next job, they sock it to you. Make sure they don't do that. Say, is this going to be the same price next time when I have a one-page letter to a parent? Is it going to be similar to this? Ask that question up front. And does the translator have some experience in my field? Not that a lot of the work we do in communicating with parents is rocket science, right? That's not the case for the most part. We're not translating instructions for use of a brain catheter. We're trying to communicate with some parents. But yet they should have some understanding. Do they understand the acronyms that we throw around? Do they understand the idea of why we communicate with parents? Why do school districts need to do that? Do they understand the importance of the mission? Make sure that they've done some work in your field. Any questions that I can answer? I hope. Meaningful translation is very difficult. It's a great comment. Yeah, I would encourage this section to be very much a discussion. So I would love to hear from you folks. Number 1, if I missed anything. Number 2, if you have any questions. Number 3, any comments you have. And I think that is a great one. It is very difficult. Translation is a difficult task. If you follow me on Twitter, it's Peter Argo. At Peter Argo. I always put really good quotes out there about translation, and many of them are about how difficult it is, especially with literary translation. It's incredibly difficult. I'm enthralled by what the J.K. Rowling Harry Potter translation effort looked like. Finding those literary translators to do that work and keep the message of that book, but yet make it appropriate for the culture, because now we're dealing with witchcraft, which is kind of a witchcraft and wizardry, which is kind of a weird thing, and in some cultures it's kind of odd. So they had to be very careful and very sensitive to how they did that. Great comment. So our translation teams vary. So the folks that work on your documents for education are not the same ones that work on, we do a lot of medical devices. That's my background. I came from a company called Marquette Electronics, and I was a project manager there. And we did bedside monitors, treadmills for EKGs, EKG units. That's a whole different world than, say, also we do a lot of advertising work and marketing. Completely different skill set. So there's different translators for the different types of documents. Great point. Brazilian Portuguese or from Portugal? Brazilian, okay, great, great. And where are you guys from? Saudi Arabia? Okay, great, outstanding. Oh, yes, yes. Education is a small part of our business, but it's an incredibly important part of our business. And as I said, it has personal meaning to me. So we decided to get into this field a few years back, and it's work that we really like. But yes, we do work for medical devices. We do marketing work, manufacturing. We do a lot of manufacturing. We're in Chicago, just outside of Chicago in Glenview. We have an office in Milwaukee. We don't have one here. But again, something interesting about this type of work in terms of translation, so our translators are all over the world. So the translation projects we do are hosted on a server, and when we communicate with our translator, they get a link that says, here's your job. They log into our system and create the translation. And when that translation is completed, there's no bottlenecks. It automatically alerts the editor, hey, it's your turn, and they edit. And one of my favorite teams is, the French translator happens to be in California, but the editor is in Paris. And they work like their technology is a wonderful thing. When I started 23 years ago, there was no internet. There was no email, exactly.
You have a website?
A website? Oh, sure, absolutely. Feel free to contact me anytime. There's my email address. We also have a booth here. You're more than welcome to come visit, and I can give you, I have cards with me as well, so after the session I can give you my cards. Feel free to reach out anytime. I think our blog is interesting, but I'm biased. So feel free to check out our blog. We just released one yesterday, how a local school district was, not local to Michigan, but a local school district out east was sued because they were not providing proper translation to a family. This has become regulation. We have to communicate to our families. We're releasing another one on education on Monday, so feel free to visit. There's a place where you can follow as well, and I'm always happy to chat. Feel free to contact me anytime. Any other questions? All too often, people think that it's a replacement, and I usually know I'm in trouble when a client says, hey, I need you to convert this English document. It isn't a mathematical equation. There's art, there's science behind doing proper translation. And I am one of those people, though, that doesn't completely throw Google under the bus. Here's my point on Google Translation and automated tasks like that. I think if we go with the hypothesis or the intent that we always want to create connection where connection previously didn't exist, Google Translate is a good thing for you have a loved one in another country. And I have family that doesn't speak Italian. I was fortunate enough to be raised in a bilingual household, and I studied Italian. My background's in finance and Italian. So I'm fortunate. So I can communicate with my relatives in Italy. But not everyone is so fortunate. So you sometimes get an email or a letter. Great. Use Google Translate. The risk is incredibly low. I always say measure the risk. The risk is low. You get a gist. Oh, my uncle's trying to say hello. That's wonderful. Your responses can be comical. But if it's just low risk, that creates a connection where it didn't previously exist. Where I have an issue with Google Translation is when it's used professionally. I have a client of mine that had a small package that they Google translated the package, and there was the word year in Spanish, and they forgot the ñ. It's a completely different word. So the retailer, a very large retailer, the largest in the world, said this package will not be on our shelves with that typo. It was $75 worth of translation that cost them $25,000 to repackage that product. If they had done it with a human, it would have been $75. They used Google Translate instead, and they paid dearly for it. It can't be used for professional work. It just can't. It can't. It can't be used for that. But again, it's great for certain instances. I tell clients that if you have something that's low risk and you just want to understand the gist of it, I'll give you an example. And this is not using Google Translation, but it's using our engine with machine translation attached to it. So the tool we use, for example, when we're doing work for your district, we're banking it in that translation memory. Well, we can run a process that says, look at the translation memory first. If there's anything that's missing, use machine translation. So we can use that process. When do we use it? Again, only when it's low risk. I had a client that said, hey, we just found this document. It's 200 pages. It's written about our company. It's in Chinese. We have no idea what it is. We just want to get a gist. We want to understand what are they saying. So we used that process. It was low risk. They looked at it. They determined it was nothing that was predatory. They found out it was a doctoral thesis written by a student in China about their company. And it was incredibly interesting. In fact, they contacted the student, and we helped them contact them. It was a nice thing. However, if you're going to do something that's going to be published or consumed by the public, it really shouldn't be used for that. Yeah. And unfortunately, in our industry now, there's a huge push to this. Let's use machine translation and then have a human edit it. My nice little term that I use for that is lipstick on a pig. Because all you're doing is taking something that's sort of miserable and improving it a little. It doesn't work. That's not how our mind as a translator works. This is not the most popular, my theory or my position on it is not the most popular in my industry. There are many that think I'm going against the grain. I'm happy with that. Because the mind fatigues. If you start reading work that's unacceptable, you have 100 pages of material to read or review that's been machine translated. After about 1 hour of that work, you start accepting things that shouldn't be accepted. And unfortunately, that's something that I think there's a trend against that now, I think, because companies are realizing, I'm still paying something for this, and I'm getting something that's embarrassing me with clients. Doesn't really sound great. Why should we do it? So, great point. Yeah, I would agree with you. In fact, you know, one of my project managers has a master's degree in linguistics. She became interested in our field later in life. So we recruit from your world, certainly. It's not easy to get hired by a translation services firm. I'll tell you it's difficult, and I'll tell you why. We've been doing this for 23 years. We have teams that I trust, and I trust them with my corporate life, right? You know, our project managers know who does good work, and the ones that don't last. The way we recruit is we typically look for some experience, at least 5 years to get into our team. Now, and I'm a firm believer, I know that's tough. Well, how do I get the experience if you're requiring it if I never can get it? Well, what I would say is even if you've done some work on the side, you need to list some of that as experience. Make sure your resume is geared towards a translation services firm and not necessarily towards being hired as an ESL teacher or an ELL teacher. Try to do some work for your district. Document it. Say, well, I've done 3 years of this type of work, 2 years of this type of work. And you can also go with one of the firms that doesn't have as high of a bar. There are some of the larger firms that pretty much you raise your hand and say, hello, I speak a language, and you can get in and do some of that work, some of that crowdsourced work, which is, in my mind, a little meaningless. They send you 3 sentences, you don't even know what the source document is, translate these. But it gets you some experience. There's also an organization called the American Translators Association, which is awesome. In fact, their conference is coming up in a few weeks in Washington, D.C. this year. You can get accreditation. Getting accreditation means a lot because you've taken a test where you're graded by the committee at the ATA, and it says that you have native proficiency. But we do look for people that have experience. So for example, there could be people in this room that would be great translators because now they have experience as an ELL teacher. They understand this world, and it would be a great place to start. So if any of you are interested, I would encourage you to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to me personally. I'll introduce you to our operations manager. Sure, of course. No other questions? Great. Well, thank you very much.